Okay. Hello, everyone.
So Yorick, you can hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
And
I can hear you. It's a bit iffy, but I can hear you.
okay, so this is like the way we will all get used to it as improvisation when the platforms struggle to follow. So for the people who were there, and we see there's 33 of you that have tuned in, we've been struggling for the last 10 minutes to get everything up and working. These platforms are hit by a huge amount of traffic. But first of all, for the 30-ish people that are looking into us now, very good to have you online in good health. It's, I think, one of the first important things to start with is take care of yourselves. Make sure that you are well organized on a personal level at home for your families. That's definitely what counts first. For your teams, second. So take care of good, I would say, mental hygiene. Don't go into the rabbit hole of internet doom, because it will not make you a happier person nor a more efficient person. So try to cope with the parts you can cope with. So I would say that's the first generic advice. This is such an improvised session that Yorick and myself haven't been able to get acquainted online before. So nice meeting you too. This is like the conference where the master of ceremony and the speaker meet on stage in the open. But as said, many of you over the last few days must have been in WebEx, Zoom, Teams, Hangouts, and whatever. And it always first starts with, hello, hello, can everybody hear me? So over the next few weeks, I guess everybody will get used to the fact that we are getting better and better tools, and the online tools will improve as they also get more resilience together with us as humans. And so a very good example given by Yorick here. Don't forget to keep hydrating. Very important thing when you when you work from home, to get up from time to time. And I would maybe want to start with Yorick. I prepared some slides. But because we didn't rehearse it and you were, I think, the first speaker up, we're gonna get you on stage first, and we'll move to the others, Ségolène, who's into afterwards. So Yorick, stage is all yours. I hope we can make this work.
Okay. Start right away with doing something typical in any video call situation. I will start sharing my screen. I have slides, so if the sound is a bit iffy and you don't hear everything that I hear, you will have access to these slides afterwards. So basically, what I'll be going through today, two topics which are really very closely related, is how to master remote work from the organization's perspective. So what does an organization need to do to set up efficient remote working, and what does and how do you do that from a personal level? So first, from the organization's perspective. First things first, a little bit of expectation management. If your organization doesn't do remote work at this point in time, you have to get familiar with three very simple facts. First, remote work will by definition increase asynchronous work. So waiting on other people to get things done or doing things at different tempos. Per se, that's okay. It just means that you will need to get better at organizing and prioritizing. That's useful anyway, so it's a great thing. And if you're already great at organizing and prioritizing, then it doesn't matter. You'll be fine. But you will have more asynchronous work happening with remote in any case. Second, and I know a lot of managers are nervous about this, but people working remotely will go offline to do something private once in a while. They will maybe go for a run in the middle of the afternoon, go fetch the kids, do some groceries, something along those lines, and that's okay. Of course, that will happen a little bit less right now in the current crisis, but still, it will happen. Remember, it happens in the office too. You go to the coffee machine and chat with a colleague. It's okay that people go offline once in a while. And third, and this is a really great look having remote working provides us, is you will need to focus on results and action rather than on looking busy. The kind of discipline that is required in remote work will basically be an advantage for your organization, even if you do most of your work non-remotely, physically co-located. You will learn to focus on results and outcomes if that's not already the case. So that we're going to try to achieve today. What I would like to draft guidelines for remote work that you can apply directly. I'm not talking here about making a gigantic document that will require weeks of work. I'm talking about something that you will be able to do today. 5 main topics there: meeting discipline. How do we meet? How do we do video calls? Documentation, best practices. Something about means available. It's slightly less relevant in the crisis context, but still. And do's and don'ts for managers, because the managers are often the people who are most nervous about remote work. With that in mind, I'll also give you a few elements again about what's in the future, because the crisis we're currently living with will end, but the relevance of remote working will not. It will still remain relevant to do some remote.
And Yorick, it's a great introduction. I'm going to just interrupt you for 1 second, because we're new to this. And we're assuming everybody to be on par, but even for us, it's new to have this type of virtual event. And so, in order to facilitate the very, I would say, open atmosphere we always had at our events, I just want to point people out that at the right top of their screens, there's actually a little bigger than sign, which is more, and you can open an extra tab which has a chat, questions, polls, and the people call. So I would really urge people that as you continue your talk and they have questions, that they use these options to make it interactive. Those are the things that normally I would be able to read a room and see who's like following and not, and maybe hand the mic to them. This is the virtual equivalent of that. So I just want to make everybody to make sure that they also look at these tools and these options, that we use them all together to learn how we can keep interactive events. So sorry for interrupting you with that, but inviting everybody to fire their questions or to join in with their advice while you go ahead and stay on topic, of course. Many thanks for that, Yorick, and sorry for the interruption.
That's absolutely fine. Just one remark, Toon. While I'm presenting my screen, I don't actually see the chatter, so I will count on you to interject and pick up on any question you want.
I'll do that.
My way, if that's okay. Great, thank you. For any kind of guideline you would like to set up for remote work, meeting discipline, and why is that so important in remote work? In the context of remote work, meeting discipline means calls or video calls, and this you have to know is that video calls are even more exhausting than physical meetings usually are. I don't know about you, but when I have a full day of back-to-back meetings, I'm tired when I get home. If you do a full day of video calls, even if it's from your own home, you're going to be even more tired. So you really want to avoid having too much, and you want to choose them efficiently, and we'll get into that in a minute. There's something that needs to be taken into account, is that video is great, but still non-verbal cues remain slightly less clear in video calls than they are in person. So it's not exactly the same thing. More formal a video call can help. The other point, which is really important, is that when you're working remotely, you don't just bump into people in corridors. So you don't have that quick chat, that quick, oh, I needed to talk to you about something, which is easy to exchange and bring people up to speed quickly, that you would have in the office. So you need to plan ahead. You know that you're not going to be bumping into people. So the people you need to talk to, you need to plan ahead, and you need to align and plan that. And in any case, again, and this goes on for everything we do with remote work, the meeting discipline you will acquire in the remote context will actually have benefits transferred to your usual operations. So it's always useful. Okay, so what does it look like? The first thing you have to do is start with one question, and you've heard this if you had any discussion about meetings before. Start with why you're having the meeting, why you're having that video call. To help you answer that question, there's a few categories which, if your call really doesn't fit into it, probably it's not worth a meeting. Those categories are a status update, brainstorming session, or anything approaching that, so basically a creative discussion, taking a decision, several people who need to take a decision together, discussing an issue to understand it better, do root cause analysis, or just get a better overview of it, or a gathering of information. Information is coming from several sources, and you need to gather that. If your topic doesn't fit at all in these categories, probably it should be an email or a documentation update. That being said, even if your topic does fit those categories, do wonder if you really need people exchanging live about that topic or not. A status update is the typical case where you might have a few questions.
Yeah, and I was just going to chip in there, Yorick,
I heard you.
Because it's one of the most important things, and it's a new meme that's going around. Before, we used to say the meeting that could have been an email. Now it has become the webcast,
Absolutely.
web streaming, whatever tool your company is using that could have been an email or a document or a chat online. So this is definitely something we all have to be very well aware of, that we should not start having daily long video calls with everybody on there, because it's just going to make us all more tired than we already are. So thank you very much for pointing that one out.
Don't worry. I will be hammering that point home during the whole webinar, actually. So indeed, so you have to start with why, and then you have a small process to follow, which is pretty simple. And I really encourage you to get all of your organization to think about this and adopt this as a kind of mental hygiene. So first off, your first step, as I just said, think long and hard before you actually book a call. Do I need to have it? Then, second point, which is quite important, make sure you only invite the people who are absolutely necessary for the discussion. Much too often in meetings, we have two audiences: the people who really need to discuss the subject, and people who are interested in the outcome. People who are interested in the outcome can be updated later on. So they can be kept out of the meeting and updated later on. This is all the more important when you're remote, because as we've just noticed with even this platform, the more people are in there, the more you have risks, let's say, of a problem of bandwidth or people not hearing each other. So remote is really punishing if you have too many people in a call. Again, you want to keep those calls as short as possible, and I'll go back to what that actually means later on. So have crystal clear agenda so people know what to expect and can prepare. And likewise, where you can, prepare with written documentation that can help be more efficient. There's the same Amazon practice, the Amazon 6-pager. Every management meeting at Amazon starts with people reading a 6-page document which outlines what we are going to be discussing, why it's relevant, why it's better than what was done before, and how much it's going to cost. I'm not saying you have to go that far, but that notion of preparing up front so that you can have a meaningful discussion is very useful. It avoids that situation we all know, which is having weekly meetings where each week we're wondering what we discussed last time. Also, to avoid wondering what you discussed last time, document the outcomes. It doesn't have to be a 20-page document, but please do document what comes out of your meeting. What to document, probably that wasn't a very useful meeting, and distribute it to people who are interested, of course. So again, as I said earlier, invite the people who are absolutely necessary, but keep the other ones informed. Okay, so I talked about meetings, and indeed, as Toon was correctly pointing out, 90% of people, roughly, have said that that could have been an email about a meeting at least once in their lifetime. This is something that is really coming around. That could have been an email, and it's oftentimes true. Problem is, a lot of people also have no idea how to actually document or write an email correctly. Of course, when you're remote, this ability to have written communication and written documentation is even more important than it is in the ordinary context. So let's dive into that documentation aspect. What is documentation when I'm referring to that? I'm referring to, well, stuff worth reading, which means what? It's information that is factual. It's not something that needs to be debated. It's actual facts, which will be relevant to one or several people at a later point in time, and so they will need to access it. That is what I call documentation in this context. So there's a few examples underneath here, and you can find more in general. But so describes the past. The past is a fact, so describing the past is documentation. And if that past might be useful to somebody, then it's worth writing it out. You've got process descriptions. A process is something you need to follow, so it should be pretty clear-cut. That falls into documentation. Templates or reference cases which you need to refer to or use in your business, that's factual information. Likewise, technical descriptions, which is what we most often think about when we talk about documentations. How does software work, that kind of thing. And key, very important, something that we don't do enough, is actually log decisions. Decisions that were taken are a fact. Maybe we need to revise them later on, but it's a fact that we decided upon something for a certain reason. Log that one way or another. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about documentation. And how do you do that? What is the discipline you apply to documentation? First and foremost, and this is really in your guidelines I was talking about, that you need to try to figure this out one way or another. First off, what you will use to document things. We will go into tools another day. I think next week we're talking about tools, but it can be shared folders, it can be MS Teams or OneNote, it can be tools like Notion, Slide, Google Docs. At a certain level, I don't really care as long as you know which one it is. The most important thing for your organization is that people know where to document information. Afterwards, we can look at what's the most efficient way, but first off, they need to know how. Likewise, how do you structure it? Where do I find information? Is information regrouped by project, by department or team that is working together? And who should be responsible for what parts of the information? Those are the two most important things and slightly most obvious ones. There's two other points that are important. First off, it's great to say we have an agreed platform. We know how we structure our documentation, but you also need to integrate updating your documentation into your process. Try to ritualize it. Make it something automatic that people will do on a daily or maybe weekly basis, and have somebody who's responsible for follow-up. Have somebody who really follows up that, okay, the documentation has been done. It can be pretty simple, but you need to have that quick check of have our meetings been documented. And then your documentation process also needs to be documented so that people know how to do things. There's a little bit of inception going on here, but it's really important that new joiners, new people in the company easily can find how to do this. There's something very important about this slide is that you can, up to a point, decentralize this to the teams or projects. I would argue that platforms is probably an organization-wide decision, at least in a certain amount of platforms. But you could absolutely say, okay, this team has decided to work this way, and this team has decided to work another way, as long as the touch points between the teams are also discussed. So that is an option that is open to you regarding documentation. Okay, so now we know more about meeting, we know about documenting what was out of it, how do we communicate things. So this is a flowchart. Okay, I don't know if everybody loves flowcharts, but really I do encourage you to have an idea of which tool should I be using to communicate a certain specific thing. Here when I'm talking about communication, it's really one-way information. I'm really talking about I want to provide somebody with information and I don't expect feedback. In that case, the logic here, and I'm not saying this is a perfect flowchart. I like it, but you're absolutely free to change it, obviously, according to your preferences or specific situation. But I would like you to consider the different criteria and maybe add your own. So you want to communicate something. The first question is it urgent? Does somebody need to know this urgently, life or death kind of matter? If that's the case, stop mucking around, pick up your phone, and, or use instant messaging or SMS type of thing. Typically, that will be the fastest way to reach people, and they know, increasingly so, that things that come there are typically urgent. If you really need to contact a lot of people, well, email is a decent fallback, but it's very far from perfect, as I'm sure you will all agree. Now, if your communication is not urgent, then we get into the question of, Are we talking about something that's emotional or complex? And by complex, I don't mean complicated, that it's hard to understand, but it's more a question of is there going to be a back and forth, nuances here? Do I expect a lot of questions on it rather than the technicality of it, right? So if I need to have this kind of exchange, or if somebody needs to be able to react emotionally, so typically hard consequences to the crisis we're having now are emotional and are complex. Those are good situations to say, well, we need a meeting or a video call or several meetings or video calls. When people will react emotionally to something, giving them the room to express that emotion is typically very important. Then you've got the question of, will this be relevant later? If it will be, well, typically we get into the aspect of documentation we talked about earlier. If it won't be, an email is fine. It's read it and I can delete it. Notice here the distinction, email and documentation are two different things. Much too often we use email as our own personal documentation systems. And that's fine for an individual, but for the organization it isn't, because email is personal by pretty much definition, and the organization needs a broader system. Very quickly, you have the same kind of logic when you want to discuss something. So remember I said communicating is one way, discussing is I need to have an exchange with somebody about a specific topic. And here you've got the discussion, is it one-to-one or not? And if so, we get to the same kind of flow we had earlier. Urgent would be phone or instant message, not urgent is email. If it's not one-to-one, complexity, meeting. If not, group chat. Group chat like Slack, like Teams, all of those kind of tools are great. But honestly, they're only really efficient for not very complex discussions that involve multiple people. You don't want to have a very complex discussion on Slack on a channel level if you can avoid it, let's say. Okay, so those are the main elements for practices. There's something that today is harder for you to do, but consider it in the future, is providing the means to work remotely or thinking about those topics. Well, there's a whole question of digital tools. I give a small list here. We'll discuss that next week. There's also a question of people need to work from home. Well, they need to have the right circumstances, possibly a budget for home office is something to consider. In 2020, I would suggest that most people require a laptop and mobile. Those should be no-brainers for most people in most circumstances. In some cases, for security reasons, you might want to rethink that, but usually it's more a question of securing the laptop and mobile than it is challenging this. But okay, people need chairs, they need desks, they need screens. You might want to provide a little something for your employees to be able to do that. Something to be considered, it does have tax implications, so it needs to be looked at, but at least have a look at this. Likewise, in your buildings, adapt your meeting rooms. If you have more and more people working remotely, your meeting rooms need to accommodate the fact that some people might be remote. Okay, so you will afterwards have to communicate what these different topics, and well, you have a few pointers about how to communicate in the previous slides. And one thing that's very important in the context of this crisis is a message I really want to reinforce. Communicating that you don't know yet is very much okay, and it's actually a reassuring thing to do. Telling your people we are unsure about the next step here is very much okay, and at least they know where you stand. They know that a decision hasn't yet been taken. There's no secret weird thing happening. There's no decision that you're not yet telling them. Communicating you don't know yet is okay. In times of crisis is actually a very important thing to be able to do. And finally, some do's and don'ts for managers. I'm quite passionate about these. As a manager, please do not monitor who is online when. Honestly, if you, the answer I get to that sometimes is, yeah, but if I don't monitor who's online when, I don't know who's working or not. But you shouldn't really care who's working or not. You should care who is providing value. And providing value is a question of the output and the results that they produce. the hours worked should not be a measure of that. If the only thing you can measure is the hours somebody worked, there's something wrong with your organization, I would argue. Some people, on the other hand, say, no, but I don't care about that, but I want to know if people are going offline for a certain amount of time. I want a constant update about that. Okay, it's pretty much trying to get the same thing, honestly. So nice try, but no, don't require that either. To Toon's point from earlier, please don't overburden people with calls. Again, calls are exhausting, so don't do that. Require people to have their camera on at all times is a bad idea for loads of reasons. Of course, you want to be able to see people, you want to be able to interact, that is fine. But since people are taking their calls from home, they don't always master everything that is happening. Maybe their wife is sick on the couch and they don't want to show that. Maybe their partner doesn't want to be shown, and that should be okay. On the other hand, by the way, it is very much okay if your children or partner or pets or whatever pass on screen at a certain point in time. It is part of what happens in remote work. It really happens, and it's okay. We're all human. We all have families, pets, what have you. But don't force people to show that if they don't want to. You can't expect instantaneous reaction on each and every direct message. There's a lot of people who expect that, thinking, well, people are working from home, so they should be available. But the thing is, people are home, but they are working. So it's okay that they might be focused on other things and just checking constantly if they haven't gotten a direct message or an email. They should be focused on their work, and that's a great thing to do. Also, don't consider that you're doing your employees a favor by giving them home working. It's not a perk. You benefit from it too. It's a win-win situation. It's great for everybody. It shouldn't be a perk that you kind of leverage in negotiation. Only a few things you should do, though. Encourage remote socializing. So here, typically, I've been saying quite a bit. Okay, don't do too many video calls. Don't keep those short. But you should provide for a little bit of time, especially if you have long stretches of remote work like we're having now in this crisis, to have a little bit of social time, to have some time, to have the equivalent of the coffee machine discussion. Because we're human, we're people, we need human interaction, and we need to keep that connection with our coworkers going. We need to keep that culture within the organization going. So try to have a little bit of that going on, for instance, at the end or beginning of each call. Another practice, and in a second, is review sessions. Try, generally speaking, to do positive reinforcement if people have been doing things the right way. They've set up their meeting very well. They've done the minutes. Thank people. Do positive reinforcement as much as possible. It's also a good idea to have a support contact for all remote-related issues. Typically, it's either IT or HR, and typically people will try to contact people from those departments without really knowing. So try to figure out who should be a first line of support there. Not easy to do, but it's really useful. And finally, have a few occasional online-only events to keep the social life going on the remote world, and to show that online is still your company with all its fine and fun. So, conclusion to this section. After this webinar, I would like you to draft guidelines about meeting discipline, documentation practices, communication best practices, means available if you can do it, and do's and don'ts. It can be a one-page document. It shouldn't necessarily be extremely long, but think about those topics and try to have those guidelines. Set up a review group. A review group should be a recurring meeting once every 2 weeks. In this context, maybe a little bit more often, but once every 2 weeks or every month in a regular context, to discuss what's going right and wrong with remote working. Keep it short, but the interesting thing to do is to have a few permanent members, somebody from IT, somebody from HR, an ordinary worker, and then a couple of slots for rotating members, other people who you will invite to continue gathering insights. And ideally, the idea is to define actions out of this, obviously. And once you've done all that, communicate the results. And that does it really for the organization perspective. Since I'm not hearing anything, I assume that everything is going okay for everybody.
Yes, we can hear you fine, and it's very clear. So I'm just putting in there for everybody else. What we're seeing is that the chat is very slow and lagging. So I think that the platform is really coping in all its dimensions. But I'm having a parallel channel here through my phone, and they're saying that this is going fine. So I hope that the 30 people that we see being in this stream are indeed enjoying the great advice you've given so far. I would also say this is the moment, if you have questions,
Okay.
to launch them in the question tab, which is on the top side. If you have the bigger than sign, and then next to the chat there's the question tab, so people should be able to reach out there. But then again, I'm struggling. So thank you for pointing that to all of us, Yorick. I'm struggling myself to see. Like I've done a few things in there, and they're not coming through. So if you're frustrated, you see a question now. Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead. Well, everybody can read it, so I don't need to do this, and I'll let you respond to it. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So it's an excellent question, Daniel. And actually, today we're working from home. In the future, when we'll be doing remote working, some people will also choose to work in a co-working space or something like that.
Yeah.
And indeed, one of the things you need to check, and that will depend on your insurer, is what your employees have. Question, it kind of depends on the kind of coverage you have. You check with your employees are actually insured, because indeed working from home typically is covered pretty simply. It should most of the time it's actually covered with your typical contract. But when you're leaving home, for instance, of the afternoon, and I find it fine, goes for a run and they break a leg, then are they covered? I would then say, well, maybe not, but that's something to discuss with your insurer. It's a great question, and indeed it's honestly it's a point that I took out of my slides just not to bog things down. But when determining when you need to where employees are allowed to work, it's something you really have to look out for, because it's indeed something that can have a lot of impact.
I was just going to say, we have Ségolène coming up after you, who's been doing this for a long time too, and maybe out of my personal experience with this, it's complicated, and it's also a bit unclear towards Belgian labor law. So I think we are experiencing force majeure now, and so there will be a lot of lenience in what was considered to be work and what was leisure or personal time. So that's one aspect of accidents that might happen right now. Case law will point out in which respect the courts will follow your there. But before all this happened, my own company, data.be, we were already working remote, and it was quite complex to get the insurance for one of our employees who was traveling the world while working for us. And as you said correctly before, we don't care in which time zone and when you do work. It's one of the main things as an employer you have to let go, is to want to control and micromanage when people do what. It's all about the outcome, and it's all about the trust that you give to your team. So Yorick put that very well before. But we had to get a special insurance to make sure that this team member who's right now stuck in Indonesia, due to all the flights being blocked, trying to get back to Belgium. These are all new things. It's uncharted territory for everybody. We're trying to get him back, and he's trying very hard to get back. But we got a special insurance to make sure that on top of the liabilities as an employer, this is like the one obliged insurance in Belgium you need to have for your employees, the employer and the employer's liability insurance, which is a pretty cheap employing cost. If you have screen workers, you have to extend this if you have people traveling abroad, to make sure that medical costs and repatriation, if they need to come back, are covered. And of course, with what's happening on a global scale now, this is extra complex. So we'll see how all that works out. As you must have found out by now, the whole this whole coronavirus is not covered under any normal insurance policy. It's not an insured event under most policies. I contacted 2 already, and this is excluded. So from an insurance point of view, we're pretty much in a gray zone for the moment. Yeah, courts will have to decide how we cope with this. But I hope our joint offer is helping Danielle to move this forward. As said, it's complicated.
Yeah, indeed. It's a great. Yeah, one of the hard things. Okay, so that was about the organizational side. If there are any other questions afterwards, we can have a look. Perspective. Obviously, there's going to be a few links between the two, so it should go a little bit faster. How do you make sure that you have a productive remote work day, and how do you take care of yourself? There are really 5 elements that you need to take care of. First off, it's the good setup physically. It's good agreements with your family, especially in this context right now. Rituals will keep you sane. Good discipline goes a little bit back to what we've already discussed, and good communication again, but a slightly different aspect of communication than what we've already touched upon. So probably the most important thing to as an individual to focus on when you're setting up your remote working practice is, okay, where do I work? And of course, all of this is highly dependent, of course, on your personal circumstances, your means, and where you live. All of that depends from worker to worker. In a perfect world, obviously, if you have a home office that is fairly isolated and comfortable, that's best. But not everybody has that. If you don't have that, I do have one recommendation: is try to avoid having the couch or any other very comfortable place as your default workspace. The reason for that is you don't want your brain to completely make a mix between what is work and what is leisure. You need to be able to make the difference between the two. And if you are working in the place where you like to relax most, you will confuse your brain about that, and making the separation between the two will be much too hard. Too comfortable, you might fall asleep. You also need to ergonomics as much as possible, so be careful about your back and that kind of thing. I'm not going to go too far there, but as much as possible, try all those aspects of what is a good setup for a desk. Noise, again, managing noise is one of the challenges when you're working from home. If you can get a quiet room, that's great, but sometimes you can't. Maybe you have your family, your children around. If not, you can see what I'm wearing on my head. Noise cancelling headphones are ideal for this. They've gotten cheaper. And they're also very, very practical for video and phone calls. I would say, though, just like video calls can be exhausting, having noise cancelling headphones on your head all the day, you're also helps to isolate yourself from the noise when you need to focus, but don't wear them all day. Lighting is quite important. Pay attention to getting enough light when you can, or if you can, natural light is always great. But try to get work level lights for work. By that I mean bright enough that you can. Snacks seems a bit silly, but actually some studies have shown that people, when they're working remotely, they don't dare to go away from their computer at all, and they forget to either to eat or to drink. Now, I'm not suggesting that you eat Mars bars all day long, but do have a little bit of something that can act as your reward for you. And in particular, stay hydrated. We joked about that earlier on with Toon, but it's really important that you stay hydrated. You know, not getting hydrated leads to headaches. And talking about headaches, one of the most amusing facts that has been about doing homeworking, and especially in a context such as this one, at home, whole family at home, is that people get inexplicable headaches. And one of the key reasons to that is that we're not used to the idea that several people in a room or in a house breathing with windows closed and really not enough oxygen, and that gives you massive headaches. So keeping your rooms fresh and ventilated as much as possible is really key to a good home working experience. It's really an important thing. And by the way, just this morning, I saw somebody raising the same point on LinkedIn. So I thought, okay, it's good that I had that in here. The most complex one, and we could talk for hours about this. is dealing with the family at home. Okay, it's not always easy. There's many family members at home. So there's a few tips, and please let's discuss afterwards if you have other topics you want to discuss. I would recommend having something along the lines of what I call focus mode, and it's somewhere where your whole family can identify very quickly. Okay, now is a moment he or she should. You can do that by, for instance, when you're wearing your noise-canceling headphones. Okay, well that's easy. Everybody can see. Maybe you can do something fun with it, like having a plush toy on your desk. If you're on your desk and say, "Daddy shouldn't be disturbed at that point," or you have a flag. Oh, mummy shouldn't be disturbed at that point. Something along those lines, so that they know these are the moments you really shouldn't be interrupted. I'm sorry, but planning. The more you do remote work, the more you need to plan. And one of the things you need to plan is the day. Stuff like, well, you know what, today I'm giving a webinar, so, you know, I really need to be a little bit isolated during that point in time and not disturbed during that point in time. There's also the question of how are we handling lunch today. You know, oh, well, I have a call from 11 to 1. Oh, well, I have a call from 1 to 3. Well, maybe we're having lunch separately then. You need to align on that kind of thing. Again, sounds silly, but a lot of tensions can come from not having aligned up front about this kind of thing. And then there's the aspect that, okay, we're talking about you as a worker, but think about the family. Everybody needs to have time for kind of focus mode, especially in the context of being home most of the day. And a little bit of time to their own as much as possible. Try to integrate that for the kids. They have time to read on their own and do something like that. Quality time up front. It's too easy to do full working mode and not anymore. So try to make short plannings, and you can do that on a week basis or on a day basis, up to you. But try to figure out how people can look forward to quality time with you. I hear a lot of popping. Are there questions I need to be answering, Ton?
I hear the popping too. So I hear the popping too. I think it's that we have a number of people doing polls in there. So that's the poppers I get and some of the chat. Okay. But I would say continue for now. We'll take them right after, right? So I think you're on so go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So planning quality time up front is very, very useful. Quality time with you, so they get to enjoy you, and maybe on their own too. Again, so it's an important thing. It sounds complicated, but it's a little bit. Then there's the aspect of rituals. Going to work, going to the office in the morning is a very easy thing. You have your routine. You take your coffee. You go on the road, and you're in work mode. When you're working from home, especially in the context of the current crisis, for instance, it's not like that at all. The problem is our brains respond to barriers. There are studies, I'm sure everybody has experienced this, right? You go to the kitchen and you wonder why you were going in. You were going there to look for milk or something, but you walk into the kitchen. At the moment you walk in, you don't remember that you were looking for milk. Our brain responds to barriers. It's been documented. And so having rituals, having where you start and stop your workday with a hard start and hard stop will really help you make that difference between I'm working and I'm in leisure mode. There's loads of ways to do that. Some people like to say a sentence out loud like "Let's go," and do maybe something. I like personally to do things that are a little bit ridiculous and over the top. So I will literally in the morning if I'm working from home say, "Okay, let's go." And okay, might frighten the cats, but it doesn't really matter. And do something similar in the evening when you're closing down. One satisfying is closing a book because it gives me closure. Even if I haven't been working on a book, it can help. It doesn't really matter what you do, but find those rituals and try to stick to them. And after a few weeks, they will help your brain switch on and off. So do not try to have a never-ending workday. Breaks are important rituals, obviously, and again, it's been shown that people who do home working are more afraid to take breaks than people who are working in the office. So definitely allow yourself those breaks. Well, what I would suggest is you need to do a short break at regular intervals. What that regular interval is will depend on who you are, what your personal needs are. A good way to start off is 45 minutes of work, 5 minutes of break, and you'll see, okay, if after 45 minutes you still feel fully focused, make it longer until the moment where you feel, okay, I need a break now. Or conversely, maybe after 20 minutes you feel it's absolutely fine. If it's 20 minutes and 1 minute break, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter as long as you find what works for you. However, even if your breaks are short, make them real breaks. So not just, oh, well, I'm switching my window to my email or just looking at LinkedIn or Facebook. Try to make it a real break where you read a page of, or you listen to a song or something really different from your work processes. Again, can be very short, but something that really is an actual break. Then you've got the question of you need at least one longer break where you can actually physically get up and maybe go out, go for a small walk. Do that for health purposes. If that is your kind of thing, so that you get physically active. One of the big dangers of working from home is that you don't move enough. So really, it's all the more important in this context to get one longer break in. Longer being, I don't know, anywhere between half depends also on your availabilities, of course, and take that opportunity to get up and go out. And then it helps to have goals. It's easy to lose focus when you're working from home because you don't have your colleagues and your boss and all of your current context bringing into focus what you should be doing. You really have to decide on your own. So make it something that you really decide consciously. Have 2 or 3 major goals you want to achieve every day, and that will help you focus on what's most important. By the way, I talked about rituals to your day. Setting your goals is one of those great rituals. You can start your day with that, or a lot of people actually like to set their goals for the next day. So it's end of day ritual to plan the goals they will achieve the next day. And the great thing about that, the logic behind that, is that not only have you closed off your day, but you already have the next day under control, and that is a very pleasant feeling. Apparently, I'm a morning goal setter personally, but. Okay, discipline. The processes of remote working is very similar to what we've already discussed from the organizational point of view. Be mindful of what needs to be documented. It's something. It's hygiene. Don't overdo video calls; they get exhausting very fast. Be professional in your demeanor. To keep with a professional mindset is an important point to discuss briefly. If you're working in your pajamas all day, again, you will end up confusing what it is to and what it is to be in the working mode. So it helps to have a difference between the real and work mode. I'm not saying you should be wearing a suit from home. Be comfortable by all means, and I think it should be also very much okay to be comfortable when you're having a video call, but keep it on the professional level, business casual, as consultants used to say, something along those lines. Again, just to make that distinction, that's the reason. It's not a question of, it's the company needs you to wear certain clothes, but it's for yourself to make the difference between both. And most importantly, if you're a manager, lead by example, and mostly that means log off. Don't send emails, instant messages, Slack messages, whatever, at 2 o'clock in the morning. If you do that, you can say to your people about, oh, we strive for work-life balance, but you're actually sending them a very direct message. Yeah, actually, no, I won't be doing that either. It's a very important message for me, this one. Okay, in my last slide about communication, this is all about the fact that there are written communications that are going to be much more prevalent in a remote context than in an office-based context. So first off, of course, consider the discussion about channels earlier, which one you should use when. But this is how to structure an easy, processable message that will be understood by most people. And something that is quite different from doing a dissertation or stuff like that. it's really start by the point you're making. We're not here to do scientific demonstrations. Start by the point you're making. If you have a question you want to ask, it. If you have a request, state it. Start with that. Then explain to the person why it's relevant. If you can speak to the person's motivations and interests, it makes them even more involved in it. But okay. Then you explain that it really is a reasoning that makes. If your point really is supported by arguments and logical arguments, that's the moment you can bring them in. And once all of that is done, the supporting facts or evidence will become interesting, and give room for feedback at that point in time. If you remember at school when we were like building demonstrations, we went the other way around because we were building up to this impregnable conclusion. But as a manager, I don't want to be taking a lot of time figuring out where it's going. I will read the support once the point is. So I tried to keep this short. We can go on for hours. Yeah, that's me. Okay, you'll see that in the slide. Doesn't really matter now. We could go on for hours on these topics, but those were the points I wanted to make, and this is that's it.
Yes, that's great.
Okay.
So I first of all,
interesting.
Very, very big thanks for this year. You can feel, and I was looking at the bottom of your slide. You've been giving this advice since 2019. And it took a global virus for this work mode to become, I think, the default work mode for I would say, knowledge workers around the globe for weeks and unfortunately months to come, we all fear. Yeah? So thanks for enlightening with that great advice. And we're going to move on to Ségolène Martin. Maybe check your audio so to see that we can hear you too.
Yeah, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, fine. Yeah, so the
perfect.
Technology is with us. So thank you very much, Yorick. I've shared your LinkedIn so people will join you on other silos too. And I did the same for Ségolène. So people who want to check out what you do for a living when you advice, they can reach out to you too. And so Ségolène has been with us in previous events. She's managing Kantify.com, an AI company, and we'll have more questions at the end. So Yorick, please stay online. But for the bandwidth, it's nice that you indeed already shut down the camera. So Ségolène, we're gonna be improvising this part. So the first few minutes, I would like you to tell us how your company has been managing the remote parts, and maybe be a little bit practical how you dealt over the last few days with the COVID-19, and then we'll take questions, hoping that they all work. So let's take it from here. All yours.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for the invitation. So indeed, so I'm the CEO of Kantify. We are an AI company, so we develop AI solutions, some of which in the financial and fintech area. We started remote working almost at the beginning of our company journey, and I can explain you why, because it's not really what we intended to do actually at the start. We had more traditional plan in place, but we wanted to hire our very first employee, so who was started as an intern and then who became a full-time team member, and he was coming from France. And he was supposed to start on a Monday, and he arrived on a Sunday. And he arrived he had rented a place in Brussels. And when he arrived by car, he went to the flat where he was supposed to stay. In the meantime, his car was robbed, and he had a lot of trouble. So he went directly back to France, and he asked us if it was possible to work remotely. And he was in a big trouble, and we needed him. So we said yes. And this is how we started remote working. And directly after that, we got a very challenging project in predictive analytics. We had to deliver. He had to be there, and this is how it started. So this is not something that was intended, and we work with different sizes of companies, some of which are like SMEs or scale-ups. For this kind of companies, remote working can seem obvious, but we also work for some corporates, and sometimes, yes, people are surprised that we are a remote-first company. And until a few days ago, actually, where now everyone is asking us, or some clients at least, how we manage it, because yes, nobody was intending to have to switch so brutally to remote working. So I'm going to share a few tips. Some of which have been said, some of which I can also focus on what I see currently in the current context, because we are not in a usual remote working context. There are plenty of things happening in your heads, in the heads of your employees as well. So I think this is a very particular time. So the first advice I have to give, and this is something what we do, it's basic. This is what we are doing now. It's having the right systems in place. So yeah, we work with a chat system. If you don't have it now, put it into place. It allows you to keep a link with your collaborators. You have channels you can have that follow the project, etc. So a chat system such as Slack is like very important. A video conference system that works well, some of them we know them very well don't work very well at all. So so this is something you should put into place if you have not done it yet. I liked what Yorick said about documentation. We had to document very carefully since the beginning all what we do. So we have a central repository online where we document all our process, and every time we have new people on board, they are introduced to like the onboarding part and what relates to them. Now, for many of you, perhaps you don't have the documentation into place, so you may see that as an opportunity, perhaps, to start documenting it. You're not going to put everything in place from one moment to another, but perhaps this is, if you don't have it in place, yeah, you may realize that this has to be codified, this has to be documented. In terms of systems and communication, I think in the current COVID times, it's some of you have kids. I also have a kid. It's okay to be disturbed by your kids, or to have like noise around you when you are in a video call. It's something as an employer, I think as a manager, you have to say it's okay, because otherwise people may be unnecessarily stressed in a context where it's already stressful. So acknowledging that people have their own constraints is important, and just like as a manager, if you can give this example of being disturbed in a way, it can be positive. Be transparent. There are companies where managers or anyone that do not share their calendars. You have to be transparent on what you are doing. Open your calendar to your collaborator, and also let them know, especially in these times when you are not available. It's okay to be not available as long as you inform the others, and perhaps you may have to plan meetings at a time where people are most available. What I see as well currently, maybe some of you are seeing that as well, is that of course we are all listening to the same stressful news sometimes, and so our head is not as empty in a nice way, or cool and quiet as it could be. And I see some colleagues told me, for example, that they acknowledge they are disturbed during the day, for example, by calls from family, from friends, and so on. And sometimes they prefer doing the hardcore work and concentration work in the evening. So for me, it's of course okay for them to organize themselves, and we have to accept and be flexible as well, in the sense that we are all under a specific level of worries, and the day is not the usual day, is not a usual teleworking day. The third advice is to have an operational framework as a remote team. Basically, if in your company or in your team you haven't like a clear way of following who is doing what and when, and deadlines, etc. This is something you need to do now, because you don't have the possibility to meet people at the office. So you have to be clear as a manager. So I'm taking, of course, and we are leading a team. So I'm taking this position to share my experience. You need you are the one who is responsible to ensure that everyone knows what they have to do, and it's basic like management, but it's not perhaps always the case, or sometimes you rely on day-to-day contacts at the office to clarify the priorities. This is not something you can easily do now, and perhaps it's an opportunity to be clear on how you define your objectives, your smart deliverables, and these kind of things. In the current times, in the COVID times, to name it that way, I think many. So on our side we have a team where mostly people are young people, they don't have kids, etc. But some of your team members or some of you may have kids, and I think you have to acknowledge perhaps that you may not be able to perform all the nice to have things or nice to have projects you had planned, and it's perhaps a good time as well to redefine your essential things, your essential projects. It's also a way to focus your team on what is more important, and perhaps I avoid that the fact that time is limited these days is not too stressful. I hope what I'm saying is clear, but I think that being able to focus on the essential is really important. The next advice is to focus on objectives, not on time. Yorick spoke about the trust and so on. I think it's really important indeed to trust your team. And what we are doing at Kantify is really focusing on objectives. So we define attainable objectives, of course, from one week to another, or sometimes multi-week milestones and so on. And we are not asking people to be at the office, so to say, from 9 to 5 or from 9 to 6, whatever. We're asking them to complete their objective in a qualitative way. And I think this is also one of the keys, especially in these days, to ensure that the work is done and people are not stressed because they have to give food to their kid or whatever at one point of the day. So this is for some companies, I know, another way of seeing and organizing their culture, but it's something that being objective driven is something that you I think have to do in the current days. Next advice is that not everything is about work. What does it mean is that, especially these days, we all hear stressful news. I think it's good to have the opportunity to give people to exchange about that, to exchange about their worries, to exchange about their organizational problems, to exchange about the news they heard, etc. So, for example, in one of in our chat systems, we have several chats, several channels. Some of them, one of them is called Off Topic. So we discuss about something that are not about work, and we can joke at the office as we would joke at the office on the chat, and so this part is important. The last part perhaps is communicate well, and perhaps it's not the most important, but a very important one. When you communicate in an office, you have a lot of context, you have a lot of gesture, you have a lot of tone, and all these elements that enable to communicate well and to ensure that your message is well understood. In a chat or in an email, it's not always the case, and I think if you don't have experience in interacting by on the chat or a lot by digital means, you should really be careful and raise awareness to the fact that yes, people have to be extra careful in the way they word their messages, and perhaps ask them to rephrase or ask. No, I think that the default position should be you shouldn't think that people want to. Sometimes this message can be seen in a aggressive or passive aggressive way, just because perhaps some emojis or some little punctuation tricks could have been changed. So I think it's important to, if you have like if you see some issues or some possible tensions on the chat, to ask if something is indeed going on, or to ask people if everything is going well, or you to have like a specific one-to-one exchange to ensure that there are no like unnecessary tensions. And one of the very good and useful tricks to know is, of course, the principle of nonviolent communication. For those of you who don't know them, it's very easy to look on the web. And nonviolent communication is just a way to ensure that you and your team members are able to word their questions or worries or comments on a specific topic. So this is one of the best practices. We have plenty of ways in which we handle remote working. The benefits we see, because I think this is what many people say. Many of you, I think, are forced now to experience full-time remote working. This was not planned, but perhaps in a few weeks, you will have seen the benefits of remote working. From our perspective, it's a gain of time. When I started remote working, I gained 1 hour and a half per day. So in terms of personal life, it's a lot of time you can gain not spending the transport, basically, at least from my perspective. You have a different culture as well. When you're objective driven, it's different that time driven, and it's also like a culture in terms of management that enables you or forces you as manager to be more, perhaps to be clear, to be more, to reflect more about what you are intending to do, and in a really more specific way. For those of you who work with clients or with users, what we have seen as well from our perspective is that we are operationally efficient. It means that the fact that we have to do all these efforts in terms of documentation, in terms of setting objectives and follow-up, and being very transparent each day on who is doing what and the difficulties and so on, is that in terms of project delivery, we have never had any problem. We are always on time, and so on. It's not like marketing speech I'm giving here. It's really the case because we had to do this effort of structure, and I think it's a benefit. It's an organizational benefit as well. Another one is that you can be borderless, so you can work with international clients without any problem. So this is the general benefits outside of the current difficult times. The challenges I see is that, of course, the daily interactions you can have at the office are very nice, especially for those of us who like to have social contacts. So what we do is that we have regular team days out of the office, so to say, or one of our last meetings, for example, we met in Lisbon, and we had some working sessions there. So it's a nice way to meet in a nice place and so on. And the other challenge, especially these days that I see, of course, that we can't ignore that the current stress that everyone is living. As a company, you have to acknowledge that and respect that, and also in terms of timing, the fact that people are not as available as they would like to be, and it's tiring. It can be stressful as well. And I think for many of you, if you haven't become, if you are not used to work remotely yet, it will be hard to become a remote first company in a few days. So you have really to start with small ways of organizing yourselves, perhaps, and redefining your objectives and focus on the essential, as I was saying before, because if you are not with a team of digital natives and so on, or if you are facing too many challenges, you can't perhaps disrupt yourself only in a few days. But it is my personal feeling. Of course, every company is different, yes, this is what I wanted to tell you. Do I have anything else? I took some notes, but no, I think that's all. So I'm listening to your questions, but the time is running, so you are.
Yes, we've done events before, Ségolène. You know that I always did the timekeeping in a very severe way. We're gonna try to keep that timing hygiene. We started a little bit later, so I think we're gonna people who need to leave. We're gonna go in the Q&A part now. But again, the tool will be I would say the stressing factor here, because we already noticed that there's quite some lag in the interactivity when people are reaching out to us. So we'll take it as it comes. If you have questions, there's a special question tab on the, as I said before, on the right side of your screen. If there's anything new coming in there, we'll take it from there. If you want to launch your own poll, I think you can even do that too. And if anybody wants to join us, I can actually add other people who are present in this call, if they have a webcam, to give them the stage. So this is as improvised as I said, sitting in a room and getting the microphone. So if anybody wants that, maybe we're trying, either you give a nudge through the app or you ask in the chat or the questions like, I would like to add something, and it would be nice if you at least have a micro or a mic and a video to add you on stage. If there's no other questions directly now, and I don't see any, so I don't know if the other speakers see a question on their side. Ségolène, you see any chance that is directed to you only? No?
No,
okay,
no.
So
we have done a small post on remote working. I can also share it with you either now or by email. So
I've used the chat window on the right to add some hyperlinks. I'll try to keep doing that if we find stuff there that's relevant. Other people can do the same. So if you want to share an online resource, the chat is probably a good source for that, as you can just copy paste your hyperlinks in there. First of all, big thanks. This is the part where we would ask people to applaud. I'm pretty sure these platforms will very quickly come up with the virtual equivalent of that. I would say Yorick and Ségolène, it was very interesting, well structured. Both the more generic advice and then the more hands-on one from a fintech that you give, Ségolène. I'm looking forward to extra questions. I see a lot of people clapping and thanking now in the chat session, so let's make that the equivalent of it. When you're in really big chats, that's maybe a personal point of advice. This morning, I had a big one with 18 people in Zoom. Then there's things you can do, like just saying, wow, this is great, or this is good, or thank you, those signs that you would have from emoticons. It keeps we're all humans. We are social beings, and we want to see the online, and we'll copy them. And so I think that's another clap. I now see people are discovering the emoticons in the chat session, so we're getting a lot of thumbs ups and thanks and claps in there. So thank you for translating these gestures to the chat window. By the end of this call, we're going to make the whole YMCA thing song going, and we want to see that happening in the chat then, right? Maybe back to questions. Again, there's probably delay in the chat window because I don't see any appearing there. So either you were brilliant and nobody has anything more they want to learn.
If we manage to see many emojis, it means that perhaps people have to ask questions in emojis, and we will be able to see them.
Very good one. So everybody.
Questions indeed, yeah.
We want the question written in emoticons. So reach out to your inner child and improvise there. We're going to try to make sense of it as you type or invent them. What I would maybe add as a closure, this was a first for FinTech Belgium. We did not manage to fully test this platform, which is Livestorm up front, but it went pretty okay after a slow start for us to get the platform up and running. Again, big thanks to Yorick and Ségolène. I shared your LinkedIn in the chat so people can reach out to you directly too. And if we do not get any further questions through the platform now, I would like you all to follow our online FinTech Belgium channels. So that's both our website, our channels on LinkedIn that we maintain, on Twitter, on Facebook, and so on. So we're really trying all the best to keep this community going with useful advice, hands-on actionable tips that you can use during this whole Corona crisis, and all keeping our fingers crossed that this is not going to last too long, and that many of the startups will survive this challenging time, because as we're now sharing ways to work together. Some of us have been in there for a while. Accept failure in your first trials, in the first platforms. Yeah, you will run into problems like you test something. We did something tomorrow in Whereby. It was tested, and then it turned out that the free version was blocking at 4 users. So you have to find another way to tell people, now we're going back to Zoom. There's really a lot of new platforms that I expect that will thrive and that we can all share like what works for you. And there's no perfect setup, right? It's about learning by doing. That's the good thing that will come out of this. We will all be more efficient afterwards as knowledge workers of not having to go to one physical place, although we really hope that we will be able to do that very soon. But to find a good mixture of the remote way and the human side of it.
What a nice conclusion.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to wrap up here. I'm trying to make up for the fact that we do not have questions rolling in. Last call to action that Alessandra is sending through is don't forget, next week we're going to try this again. As this platform works, we're going to stick with them for a while. It's webinars on the tools, which should actually help people that are trying to do the low code or the zero code type of approach to help teams that might be less technical because they're now separated from the dev department that they used to go to and ask for features to make their own mockups to make it really more actionable. And so that's next week. The link is in the chat. I really look forward to seeing you all. And in the meantime, I would ask each speaker to also give a short goodbye. But my personal goodbye would be take care of yourselves and don't forget to go offline every once in a while to keep your mental hygiene going too. All the best and looking forward to see you all live soon. I would say
take care and
thanks everybody. Goodbye. Stay safe and stay sane too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that one.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay. So as you can see, we're still struggling to find out how we're going to end this call. I seem to be the last one who's still talking and on a screen here. So if I'm allowed, I'm just going to bring you the live well and prosper sign, and hope to see you soon in better times. All the best to everybody. We're going to tune out now. Big thanks, and I hope this will go to other platforms through what you found of it, and we look forward again.